isn't narrated to her. If you have comments or questions you want to share with family or friends, that's fine. Please just do that at a very low volume so the rest of folks can still enjoy what Mark has to say. Cell phones. This would be an excellent time to turn those to silent. Now, if you feel you have to have a cell phone conversation out here, that's fine, but those are required to be taken outside. Speaking of outside, at any time throughout the presentation, if you'd like to get back outside, get some fresh air, you're more than welcome to do that. You're not required to stay in the main cabin the whole time. Ask for any reason. If you move yourself in or out of the main cabin, please close and latch the door behind you. And when you're outside, also keep in mind this is a National Marine Sanctuary. Absolutely nothing goes off the side of the boat. Mark, we're all set up. Whenever you're ready, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you, Captain Brian. Hello, everybody. How was the boat ride out here? You guys enjoy it? Yes. Anybody see any dolphins or turtles? You saw a turtle? Awesome. Those turtles, they're a little harder to spot on choppy days because you really have to catch them when they're coming up and getting that breath of air. But that's great. The turtles have been hanging out here a lot lately because it's also jellyfish season. And we get these jellyfish called a moon jellyfish out here. They've got a clover leaf shape at the top of their dome. Interestingly, that clover leaf shape is actually used in their reproduction. But those turtles really like to they like to eat those jellyfish. So wherever there's jellyfish, there's usually turtles. So I'm glad you saw some. Now as we were pulling up, I saw a midnight parrotfish over here. Parrotfish are some of the bigger fish on the reef, so they're easier to spot, but they're also not as plentiful. We have a few different kinds of parrotfish down there. That midnight parrotfish, that one has anything from a royal blue to like a midnight blue color pattern on the outside of it. There's a rainbow parrotfish. They start off as an aqua color when they're juveniles, and then they grow up to have all kinds of color in them. So they call them rainbow parrotfish. But those parrotfish, they're easy to see because they get to be about 1 foot to 2 feet long. And as we're out here, you'll notice that most of these fish are about the size of your hand, or maybe a little bigger or a little smaller. Probably some that you've already seen would be the fellas with the gold and black bars on the side of them. There they are, right there, right on cue. Those are called Sergeant Major damselfish, and those bars on the side of their body look kind of like the insignia on a military uniform, so that's why they call them Sergeant Majors. And then if you notice those smaller fish next to them, they're sort of a grayish color, real sharp detail on the back of them. They're a little bit round. There's those Sergeant Majors right down there. Those are called brown chromises. And where you tend to see Sergeant Majors, you also tend to see brown chromises. So we should see a lot of those. Now I'll tell you about fish in a little bit, but first let me tell you a little bit about where we're at. We brought you 6 miles due south of Key West today, but you are a whole lot further out into the ocean than just 6 miles. However you came to Key West, whether you came by boat or airplane, or whether you drove over a whole bunch of keys and a whole bunch of bridges, you were essentially traveling out into the middle of the ocean. Key West is a tiny little island that sits 110 miles off the coast of Florida. So you made the first 110 miles of this trip all by yourself. We brought you the remaining 6, so you are almost 120 miles out into the middle of the ocean right now. And when you look down at all those pretty things and that shallow water, and you look out the side of the boat and see those little waves that are out there, it's pretty remarkable what we find ourselves in today. I guarantee you get 120 miles off the coast anywhere else, you're not going to find yourself in conditions quite like these, that's for sure. Now, we get a lot of questions about what's the water depth out here. On the way out, it was about 35 to 40 feet deep. That's about all the deeper it gets between the reef and the Florida Keys. And that's pretty common because barrier reefs have a shallow side to them, and then they have a much deeper side. That is a rainbow parrotfish down there. You see all those colors? Yeah, really colorful. And we've been seeing a lot of parrotfish lately, so hopefully we'll see a couple more. And the other thing about those parrotfish, they swim with their pectoral fins, those fins that are on the side of their body. They tend to not use their tail unless they need an extra burst of speed. So that's one way to pick them out pretty easily as well. Now that we're out here, since we know that the water was 35 to 40 feet deep on the shallow side of the reef, now that we're out here, we're dealing with a couple of different depths. Those sandy bottom areas, that's about 18 feet deep. And the tops of these mountainous areas, well, they run about 10 feet deep, give or take just a little bit. Now we're over a spot right now, and some of you might be thinking, Mark, I think you're crazy. There is no way that's 10 feet deep. But it actually is. Our glass is about 3 feet down into the water, so that gets us a little bit closer to it. But water is also 800 times more dense than air. So that makes things look about 25% bigger and 25% closer than what they actually are. So keep that in mind the next time the fisherman in your family comes home and tells you about the giant one that got away right before it was pulled in from the water. You can give yourself a little chuckle knowing that it looked a little bit bigger and closer than what it actually was. Now, there's a piece of coral down here. I want to point this one out. Right in the middle of all those ones that are waving back and forth, you see that one that's not moving at all? It's got that white leading edge. It's down there about the third or fourth window down from where I'm standing. Keep that one in mind. Just picture that one in your mind. Take a little snapshot. Hold on to that, because we're going to talk about that coral that you just saw. We're going to talk about that one in a little bit, but I'm not going to reveal the name of that one yet. You'll hear about it though. Let me see if we've got that one over here. Folks on this side, what you're looking for, as we're floating over top of these really shallow areas, and you're looking for a coral, looks like blades coming up out of the top of the reef. It's either a rusty brown or an orange color, and it's got a white leading edge. Now, if I see it, I'll point it out, but if you see it, you can also get my attention if you want, and I'll let you know if that's the one I'm talking about. Now, this reef is very important. Everything you see down there is very important to this reef ecosystem. But you might be surprised to know just how important this reef is to planet Earth. Planet Earth is 70% saltwater, so we live on what's basically an ocean planet. Now, if you took all these coral reefs in the entire world and put them together, they would represent only about 1% of the ocean. But here's the number that drives home just how important they are. 25% of all ocean life relies on a reef at one time or another during its life cycle. So even though these coral reefs make up only a tiny part of the ocean, they're responsible for about 1 out of every 4 things that's alive in the ocean. So if we don't have healthy reefs, we don't have healthy oceans. And without healthy oceans, we don't have a healthy planet. So it's really important that we do what we can to help protect and take care of these reefs. Now this barrier reef is the 3rd largest barrier reef in the entire world. Most people have heard of the largest one. That's the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia. That one is a monster. It's over 1,400 miles long, and that one is so big that the astronauts can see that one from space when they're orbiting Earth. The 2nd largest one, I think I saw another parrotfish down there. You guys might see that parrotfish coming through over here. And keep your eyes out for a shadowy subject on the bottom there. It'd be really big and easy to pick out if you see it. The 2nd largest reef, it's not too far from here. It's located off the coast of Belize in Central America. It's a little bit bigger than this one, and it's called the Great Mayan Reef. This reef, it's North America's only living barrier reef. It's called the Florida Reef Tract, and if you're familiar with the Miami area, you'll know that Key Biscayne hangs out, or is hanging off the southeast corner of Miami. Well, this reef starts up in that area. It follows the Florida Keys down to where we're at today, and then it continues on to the west, where it ends out in the dry Tortugas that Hannah mentioned on our way out here today. Now, it's about 240 miles long in total. The specific place that we brought you to today is called the Eastern Dry Rocks. And the way that it got its name Eastern Dry Rocks is because some of these coral heads are so shallow out here that at low tide, they would actually pop up out of the water and they'd start to dry off in the sun. And those sailors who would come cruising through here centuries ago in those tall sailing ships, they would see those coral heads drying out in the water and they would say, looks like dry rocks to me. So they started to call them the dry rocks. And we just happen to be on the eastern end of it. Now the reason that I tell you about the eastern dry rocks and how it got its name is because everything that you see down there has a fancy Latin scientific name to it. But they also have common names. And their common names they get from some attribute, something about them, like an attribute or a characteristic, like maybe something they look like. Those Sergeant Major damselfish look like the insignia on a military uniform. There's another, now that parrotfish that's swimming with us right down there, that one could be a rainbow parrotfish. They start off as aqua, and then they start to develop some more color to them. He didn't quite have enough dark colors in there for me to think that he's a midnight parrotfish. So he's probably a rainbow parrotfish getting ready to make that transition to having more color. They might also get their name because of a sound that they make. There's a group of fish down there that have an extra set of teeth deep in their throats, and it's really close to their air bladder. So when they grind those teeth together, that air bladder amplifies the sound, and they make a sound like they're grunting. So they call them grunts. And there's a bunch of different kinds of grunts down there. There's one called a porkfish. It's got a couple of black bars up by its face, but it's mostly a yellow and white fish. And they're a little bit bigger than the Sergeant Majors that you see down there, so many of them. There's also another one. It's called a yellow or a blue striped grunt. And this is just a fishy looking fish that has some blue stripes going down the side of it. Now, I've mentioned quite a few fish, but really, I want to talk about the coral down there. The coral is sort of the star of the show, and if it weren't for this coral, most of these fish wouldn't be here anyways. And besides, some of those things down there might not be what you think they are. All those things that look like plants are not actually plants. And all those things that look like rocks and boulders, those are not actually rocks and boulders. Those are all living coral formations that are made up of hundreds, and in some cases thousands, of a little tiny marine animal called a coral polyp. Now from the boat, we can't see the individual coral polyps because they're only about the size of a match head. But they grow side by side and on top of each other, kind of like how apartment buildings are made, and they're interconnected into what we call colonies. So each individual plant-looking thing down there is its own coral colony, and each individual rock-looking thing that's sort of bounded by the same color around the outside of it, those are their own coral colonies as well. Now a little more about these coral polyps. In addition to being small, they look sort of like an upside-down jellyfish, and they're actually related to jellyfish. So they have some similar characteristics. They're really translucent, a lot like jellyfish are, so they don't have a whole lot of color. Their bodies are barrel-shaped, and at the top of their body, they have a slit for a mouth, and inside that mouth, they've got a bunch of finger-like tentacles. Right now, all of those coral polyps are resting because they're nocturnal. But if we could go down there at night, real close up to them, we would see something that looks a little different. At night, they open their mouths and they extend those tentacles out into the water, and they're really short, so it's not like they reach feet and feet out into the water. They just extend a few millimeters out into the water. But they sting and feed on microscopic zooplankton that just lives and floats in the water column down there. Interesting fact about their feeding, they only get about 20% of the food that they need to survive by feeding in that manner. If I only got 20%, and if you only got 20%, I'm sure you'd get in your car or something else and you'd go looking for another place where they have more food. But those coral polyps are immobile. They can't go anywhere, so you might be wondering, how do they get the other 80% of what they need in order to survive? Well, it comes from a really interesting relationship they have with a good algae that grows down there. It's called zooxanthellae. And that those coral polyps and zooxanthellae have what we call a symbiotic relationship, where they each do something to benefit the other. And with those two, the relationship works kind of like this. The zooxanthellae need a place to live. So they actually live inside the tissue of the coral polyps. And remember, I mentioned that coral polyps are translucent like jellyfish, but we see a lot of color down there. So the zooxanthellae is actually what makes up the color that you see down there. And there's slightly different versions of zooxanthellae that live in the different versions of coral down there, so that's where you get the different colors. But that relationship goes a lot deeper than just colors. Those coral polyps are marine animals, so they take in oxygen, they use it, and they put carbon dioxide back into the water. And then those zooxanthellae, since they're an algae, that means they're a plant. So they take in that carbon dioxide, and in our bright Florida sunshine, they undergo photosynthesis, create a bunch of sugars, and then they put oxygen back into the water. Well, they create so much sugar from that photosynthesis that they're able to feed those coral polyps the other 80% of the food they need in order to survive down there. So it's a pretty amazing relationship. Now, coral polyps are pretty sensitive marine animals. They're sensitive to all kinds of things. Things like ocean temperature, ocean salinity, ocean acidity. But one of the things that they're most sensitive to, in which we can control, is they're sensitive to human interaction and human touch. So let's say that we were going on a snorkeling trip down there. Before we get in the water, the captain of the boat would give us a few instructions, and one of the things would be, please don't touch any of the coral down there. There are a lot of good reasons to not touch coral, but one of them is for the health of the coral themselves. These coral polyps have a really thin mucous membrane around the outside of them. It's like a little layer of slime, and that helps to keep all the good stuff in and keep the bad stuff out. Well, if we go down there and we're swimming, by the way, folks, on this side, see that blade-looking coral right under where I'm pointing? It doesn't move at all. Take a little mental snapshot of that. I'm going to talk about that coral here in a little bit. So we're following all the rules down there. We're not touching the coral, but we see a barracuda, and that diverts our attention. We accidentally drift into one of these coral colonies. Well, what could happen is we could wipe that little layer of slime away and expose all those coral polyps to things that are in the water, like bacteria or viruses, or even bacteria that's naturally on our skin that's not so natural to those little coral polyps. Well, if they catch some of that bacteria or one of those viruses, they could get sick. They could spread that sickness around to their neighbors in that colony. And then when that happens, they could develop fevers, just like we do when we get sick. Well, when that happens, it's too hot for that zooxanthellae to stay inside of them. So they've got a couple of really big problems. First, they're sick. And second, the zooxanthellae moved out, so they lost up to 80% of the nutrition that they need in order to survive. So their outlook is not very good, but they could recover, but it would definitely be a very tough road to recovery. And I think, trying to see, I thought I saw a barracuda hanging out down there along the side of this reef, but it might have been a piece of coral that was fooling me. Sometimes that can happen if you look at things on the right angle down here. Now, of all those corals down there, there are two very basic classifications. As soon as I say the names, you're probably going to know which ones are which. We've got soft corals and hard corals. And those soft corals are the ones that look like the plants. They wave back and forth in that ocean current, the little bit of ocean current that we have today. And the hard corals are the ones that look like the rocks and boulders, and they don't move at all to the water movement down there. Now, they're all made up of the same coral polyps, but they do something a little different that makes a very big difference in what you see down there. So all these coral polyps have an exoskeleton. That's what joins them together to create their colonies, or interconnects them. And the soft corals, their exoskeleton is made out of something real similar to your fingernail. So that's what makes it so that they're flexible and they can wave back and forth in that ocean current. But let's say a storm came through here and knocked one of these soft corals off the reef. It would just float out into the ocean and disintegrate, and nobody would ever know it was here. But here's what the hard corals do that make a big difference down there. The hard corals take calcium and carbon from the water, combine them to make calcium carbonate, and that's the same thing as limestone. And then they secrete that limestone around their bodies to make this little cup-shaped exoskeleton that they live inside. Well, that's what builds up the barrier part of the barrier reef down there. So all these mountainous areas, that's the result of year after year of all these little coral polyps laying down those little layers of limestone that they use as their exoskeletons. This reef is 5,000 to 7,000 years old, and coral only grows at 1 to 10 centimeters per year. So imagine all the work that it took and how many millions of little coral polyps down there had to lay down all those layers of limestone to build up a reef that's about 240 miles long and about 10 feet from the sandy bottom to the mountainous tops. I think it's amazing, and I'm just in awe every time I come out here looking at the scope of this and what they've done. Now let me name off some of these corals. You've seen quite a few of them as we've been floating over top of these shallow areas. We've had some great looks. Those ones that are real flat, they kind of look like a fan, like how you'd fan yourself on a hot day. Those are called sea fans. There's another group of them down there. They look like rods growing together side by side, and they grow up right out of the top of the reef or maybe even down deeper along that sandy bottom. Well, those things are called sea rods. I'm thinking you're sort of catching on to the naming scheme here. So there's another one. They're very similar to the sea rods, but they're short and stubby like your fingers. Anybody want to hazard a guess what those might be called? Sea fingers? Those are called sea fingers. And then there's another one. It's fluffier. They're really actually abundant down there. We see a lot of them. They're fluffier. They look like ostrich feathers, and so they look kind of like the plumage of a bird. So they call those sea plumes. Now there's different versions of each of those too. So it's not like there's only 4 versions of soft corals. There's take a sea rod for instance. There's a real thin and spiny sea rod. So they call that one a spiny sea rod. There's another one where those sea rods, the coral polyps are in the shape of a donut. So they call that one a donut sea rod. And then there's another one, looks like it has warts growing all over the outside of it. They call it a warty sea rod. Now, I'm not exactly sure what kind of coral I would want to be if I were a coral, but I guarantee you, warty sea rod is not at the top of that list. Anybody want to be a warty sea rod by chance? No takers anywhere? So now let's talk about some of these hard corals there. We got hard coral that's in the shape of the human brain. It has the same shape, same grooves, same indentations. So they call that one a brain coral. When we get over these shallow areas, especially where there's a lot of limestone that you can see that's open limestone, those old layers of limestone, well, there's one that grows sort of in the middle of that by itself. It's green. It has a lumpy outside texture, and it's about the size of a softball, even though it might only be like a half a dome shape to it. That one's called a mustard hill coral. We've got pillar coral, elkhorn coral, staghorn coral. There's another interesting one down there. And when we get back over top of one of these shallow areas, you'll see those tan ones that encrust the old layers of limestone. They just kind of grow, spreading out. No particular shape to them at all. But those coral polyps are in the shape of a star. And if we were to wave our hand through the water above them without touching them, they would retract into their exoskeletons and they would turn pink, like they're blushing. So they call that one a blushing star coral. Now, all of those corals that I've named are named that way because of how they look. But you remember that one that I was telling you to take a little mental snapshot of? The one that looked like blades growing up, had that white leading edge? Well, that particular coral does really well on our reef. It grows up on top of these mountainous areas quite a bit. And that one's not named for what it looks like. That one's named for what it'll do if you touch it. It's going to touch you back, and it's called fire coral. Now, fire coral doesn't look scary at all. But if you were down there swimming around on that snorkeling trip and brush up against it, you're going to know right away. Because that area is going to start to burn and blister just like you touched an open flame. The pain will probably intensify to the point where you get out of the water, climb back up into the boat, and tell the captain that something got you down there. Well, the captain's going to take one look at that fire coral burn and give you the bad news. There is nothing that can be done. There is no lotion, there's no treatment or pill. Nothing's going to take away that fire coral burn. So you just have to suffer through it. And if you're really lucky, it'll go away in a couple of hours. But if you're one of the more sensitive folks to it, that burn could last up to a couple of months. Now, it'll eventually go away, and there's no long-lasting effect from that fire coral burn. But let's say that you come back down here in 5 years, or you could go to any other reef system in the entire world. If you go snorkeling and brush up against fire coral again, you are very unlucky. Because not only are you going to burn in that second place where you just touched fire coral for the second time, but that first place where you touched it 5 years earlier is going to re-inflame, and you're going to feel that burn all over again like it just happened. So that is Mother Nature's way of not so subtly letting us know that we should leave all that coral down there alone. Now let's talk about some of these fish that we're seeing down there. We're seeing all kinds of fish. There's a couple of them that I'm seeing. I'm over on the right side of the boat. That's the starboard side. They've got those yellow details and silvery body. Well, those things, they get their name yellowtail snapper because they've got that yellow tail, and if we were to chum this water, they would start going into a feeding frenzy and snapping at everything. In fact, that makes them really easy to catch. So if you're down on Duval Street looking at dinner menus later today, when we get back to Key West, you might see them under their other common name, Catch of the Day. Now, there's a cousin to the Sergeant Major damselfish that lives down there. It's called a yellowtail damselfish. It's got a dark body and a bright yellow tail. They like to hang out around these cracks and crevices or around the coral themselves. They don't really venture up to the glass and away from the reef at all like these Sergeant Major damselfish do. By the way, there's a whole bunch of that fire coral right there. It's really abundant out here along the reef. Now there's another fish, and if you see this one, then you really are paying attention. I gotta tell you that, because we've been on the lookout for this fish out here for a couple of days. In fact, I've been challenging all of our guests to try to find this one. It's called a squirrelfish. Now the squirrelfish is really a shy fish. It tends to hang out in the cracks and crevices where it's sort of shadowy and it's protected. Now that squirrelfish has a maroon and gray color pattern to the outside of it, but it's not in any specific pattern. They're just kind of co-mingled with each other. And the reason they call those fellows squirrelfish is because they've got really big eyes like a squirrel, and then their dorsal fin, they've got two of them. Those are the ones that are on their back. That second one that's closer to its tail is in kind of the same shape as a squirrel's tail. So I think between them maybe being shy, those big eyes and that dorsal fin, that's why they call those guys squirrelfish. And we haven't seen one out here in a couple days. So if you see one, you got to let me know so we can check it out and make sure that it's there. Now, let me tell you a little bit about these Sergeant Major damselfish. These fish think that they run the show out here. They're like the little bullies of the reef. What happens when Mr. and Mrs. Sergeant Major damselfish decide they want to have some babies is the female will start swimming along the reef line, and she's looking for a spot where she wants to lay her eggs. Once she finds that spot, she cleans the algae out from around it, and she lays these bright purple eggs. Moms, you're going to love this part. Once she lays those eggs, her job is done. She packs her bags and she heads out on vacation. Oh, there's a big jellyfish. What kind of glasses are those? Oh, really? Hannah, you need a pair of Ray-Bans? We'll get those right afterwards. So. It happens. Anyways, that's one of those boom jellyfish that we're going by that I talked about, that I told you about earlier. Now, so that female, she'll start swimming along. She finds a spot where she wants to lay her eggs, cleans out the algae, and she lays these bright purple eggs down there. And then she heads out on vacation. She leaves the guarding and the fertilization of the eggs to the naval sergeant, Major Damselfish. Well, he takes that job so seriously, he actually changes from having gold and black bars to having blue and black bars. That's his signal to all the other fish on the reef that he means business and nobody should come messing around with those eggs. So let's go back to our snorkeling trip. We're down there, we're swimming around, and we spot these bright purple eggs, so we want to go check them out. As soon as we start swimming in that direction, that sergeant major is going to notice us right away. He's going to swim up into your face mask and try to look big, tough, and intimidating. Well, this is a fish the size of the palm of your hand. So if you're intimidated, you could be a pool person. So you keep pressing forward. That Sergeant Major Damselfish is going to get angrier. He's going to start bumping into you and physically trying to push you away from those eggs. But you're 200 times his size, so you keep going. Well, he's going to get so angry that he's going to disappear. And you'll think you've won. But what he's actually doing is going and rounding up about 15 or 20 of his toughest buddies, and they're all going to come back and attack you at the same time. They're going to go at your fingers, your toes, your head, and your body. Now, these are teeny tiny fish that really don't have any teeth to speak of, so they're not going to hurt you one bit. But I bet you that they're going to annoy you to the point where you swim away, and that's how they get their reputation as the bullies of the reef. Now let's talk about sharks real quick. We can't come all the way out here and not talk about sharks. We get people all the time who say, "Where's Jaws? I want to see something big." Well, first, let me tell you about a little test that you can run if you're in or near the water and if you want to know if there's sharks in that water or not. Now this test is really simple, but everything has to be done in a particular order, so you have to pay close attention. The first thing that you do is you take your finger, you put it in the water, swish it around for a few seconds, and then you take it out and put it in your mouth. If it tastes salty, there are sharks in that water. Now, there's about 500 different species of sharks in the entire world. And we have about 70 of them that live down here in these waters around the Florida Keys and around Florida. We get all kinds of big aggressive sharks out here. We've got hammerhead sharks, mako sharks, tiger sharks, bull sharks, reef sharks, black-tip sharks, dusky sharks. We even have Jaws himself. Great white sharks are all the way down here. But we don't see them very often out on the reef line because big sharks need big water because that's where they find the big fish that they can make a meal out of. And if a shark were to come out here looking for a meal, all these little fish, they would just scatter and hide in the nooks and crannies of the reef. And even if a shark were lucky enough to catch one single fish out here, it would be like you having one chicken nugget and calling that your dinner. It's just not enough. So if we ever see them out here, they're usually just cruising through and looking for deeper water, except one kind of shark. And that shark lives out here because it's just about the laziest shark in the entire ocean. It's called a nurse shark. The nurse sharks get to be about 4 to 6 feet long. They have anywhere from a light or from a tan to almost a brown, like a yellowish brown color to the top of their body, which is how we would see them from up here on the boat. Their tails are really long. They're about 1/4 of the length of their body, and it kind of looks like a catfish tail. It sweeps up and back. That tail doesn't go down at all, even all the way at the very back of it. It doesn't have a bottom part to the tail. Well, to know why nurse sharks live out here, you have to understand what most sharks have to do to breathe. Most of them have to keep swimming all the time because that's how they keep water flowing across their gill plates so they can get the oxygen that they need in order to breathe. And if most sharks were to stop swimming, they could drown. That sounds sort of crazy, but it's true. But the nurse shark is a little bit different. The nurse shark has what we call a buccal pump. It's an extra set of muscles in its mouth that suck in water, and then that buccal pump pumps that water across its gills. So it doesn't have to swim to get the oxygen it needs to breathe. The buccal pump does all the work for it. So it can just find a spot on the sandy bottom that it likes, or maybe a place under a ledge on this reef, and it'll just hang out and it'll take a nap. Well, until it gets hungry. And when it gets hungry, it won't even chase other fish. I told you that nurse shark is really lazy. What it'll do is start swimming along this reef real slow, looking for the same thing I like to eat, lobster and crab. And when it finds a spot where a lobster or a crab is hiding, it'll position its mouth over that spot in just such a way that it can engage that powerful buccal pump, and it'll create such a strong suction, it can actually suck that lobster or crab right out of that spot and straight into its mouth for a nice tasty meal. And the reason they call it a nurse shark is because when it starts to work that powerful buccal pump, it makes a sound just like an infant nursing. So they call them nurse sharks.
Excuse me,